see where they went with, but I mean, as far as when you get around to analyzing, it's so different about being across the line.
Well, it might tell you more about education if a lot of people don't know much.
It's no rush. You might have to correct it by locale and see where this education needs to happen. Of course, they're going to know.
Yeah. Sounds like they have one coming up in February also. Yeah. Whoa, yeah, or the 24th. Oh, I think he was also talking at that one.
Julie on the end there.
All right, it's 5 o'clock. We'll call a meeting to order for Community Development Committee for January 15th. Start with roll call, please.
Carrie Rice,
Present.
Ryan Shirley,
Present.
Jerry Van Summeren,
Present.
Scott Counter.
Present. Okay, so we have enough for a quorum. Moving on to approval of the minutes. We'll start out with the minutes of the previous meeting of December 18th, 2025. Is there any corrections or anything that needs to be done to those minutes? Okay. None. And then we'll move to the second approval for the minutes of the previous meeting of January 8th, 2026 for our work session. Okay, everything looked good. So we'll have those, change them from draft that they're complete. And next item then would be, we'll work into the public comments section. We have two that have brought in slips, so we'll start with Dan Schmidt. Dan, if you could just tell us where you're from and introduce yourself, thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for allowing comments here at the meeting for items on your agenda. I really appreciate that. I am Dan Schmidt. I live at 756 Summit Lane North in the village in North Hudson. I've been interested and spoke at many village board meetings, attended the long-range plan or comprehensive plan meetings over the last year. I am very much supporting your resolution to oppose that rezoning request. I don't feel the property is suitable for a residential location, and I think it's important for all the publicly owned property that St. Croix County has an interest in, the village, the township, and the city, that this property not become an island of residential development amongst that. There's also, I think, a concern about if that property was developed for residential, how long-term you could maintain the Lake Malibu Dam, just because of the fact that it's just tight quarters. You know, you could have access per se if somebody says, oh, you know, we'll give you easements and things, but how does the dam get rebuilt if, you know, there's residential development there? The property has been noted as conservancy on the Village of North Hudson map for over 50 years. There's some, I don't know, I guess discussion that there possibly wasn't a proper notice done over 50 years ago, but, you know, 2 generations of residents and people in the area have known that property as conservancy. So I feel like that issue is kind of a something that's being stirred up a lot of to do over nothing. So Anyway, I'm supporting your resolution to oppose the rezoning, and thanks for letting me make some comments.
Thank you, Dan. Next, we have Celeste.
Good evening, Celeste Cobrell, Town of Hudson, 30-plus year resident on Lake Malibu in the Town of Hudson. I did send in a written public comment. Thank you very much for looking at it. I certainly don't intend to read it. I urge you to recommend that the Board of Supervisors adopt this proposed resolution. And that's because the Village of North Hudson ordinances regarding rezoning decisions direct the Village Board of Trustees to properly evaluate the proposal, that's the rezoning request, and to protect the interests of the neighbors, the general public, and the village. St. Croix County is the neighbor. St. Croix County owns the properties that entirely surround the one for which rezoning is being requested to allow residential development. And you've heard me say it before, you don't ask, you don't get. And you know from your experience, when people come to you with requests about changes in land use, you often ask, well, what do the neighbors think? St. Croix County, as a neighbor, should tell the Village of North Hudson what you think about how this rezoning, if approved, would affect county interests. And the county does have interests. That's what I put in my written comment. Where do you look to find out what the county interests are? I think you look in your adopted county comprehensive planning. And your adopted county comprehensive plans, your comprehensive plan, and also the recently unanimously adopted outdoor recreation plan identify many interests that the county has in working collaboratively with other units of government, like the Village of North Hudson, to coordinate in your planning, to coordinate in your land use decisions, to achieve some shared objectives. One is to protect and preserve and enhance important natural resources, which you've got a lot of in that corridor along the St. Croix River and Lake Malibu. It's mapped as a primary environmental corridor by both the county and the Village of North Hudson. You also talk about protecting floodplains. In my attachments with the written piece, I included a FEMA flood hazard map. All of those properties are in the flood zone, where both your plan and the Village of North Hudson plan says there should not be any structural development. It should be preserved for open space and conservancy. Also, as a practical matter, to go back to the dam, if you look at this map, which shows all of the properties, this is printed from the county's GIS system, so it's to scale. The one that's outlined in aqua is the one that they're requesting to be rezoned for residential development. Okay, it's only 100 feet wide. Look at the property on the St. Croix side of it that the county and the other units of government own and where the dam is located. It's what, 25 feet wide, max? There are some areas where it looks like it goes down to 0. So it's not, as Dan said, not just a question of being able to drive over through a residential development. That property has to be available in order to stage and do the work whenever major dam repairs or removal and replacement is required in order to protect the public safety, health, and general welfare. Then lastly, the county has interests in hanging on to its options to be able to collaborate with other units of government for the potential optional future creation of actual dedicated public parks and trails in that area. So I think that when you look at your comprehensive plans and your outdoor recreation plan, and you look at just the facts on the ground, the county has very important interests as a property owner that have not been conveyed to the Village of North Hudson, and it's still time to do it. Because at their January 6th meeting, a majority of that board said, you know, we're not so sure about that south property. So I think it's timely for them to hear from the county too. Thank you.
Thank you, Celeste. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak this evening? Just state your name and where you're from, please.
I'm Virginia Drath from Emerald Township, and I would just like to thank you for this reporting today on the water quality for our county. It's so important to have a good history of our water. And thanks, too, for putting out this year's free water testing thing. I hope you each take one and give it to somebody. I gave one at my town hall meeting last night to our clerk, and she was going to be posting it right away. It's so important if the information isn't out there, and you can't count on it being in the paper, and you can't count on people going online, but if it's posted in a lot of places, you're liable to pick up a few more. So I just want to thank you for doing this, and thank you, Patty and Tim. And, it's in the paper that I passed out, last year I passed out, or maybe last year probably, a picture of a water kiosk in Chippewa County because of their high nitrates. Well, that was the only one they had at the time, and that was like more, it was almost winter when they ended up putting that in. But now they have 4, and I don't want it to happen here in St. Croix County. I want our water to be safe from my cat outside and your dogs, your horses, everything. We gotta have safe water. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak during the public comment period? Anyone else? Okay. We'll move on then from the public comment to the business item number 1. I don't think we have any public hearings tonight. So
We do not, Mr. Chair.
we'll move on then to resolution for the grant applications for the trail work at the Orff Family Overlook.
Good evening, and thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. So this is a resolution to authorize community development to apply for a recreational trail program grant that is administered through the DNR. We applied for this same project last year, and there was a very large pool of applications, and also the DNR thinks that they maybe miscategorized our grant application at that time to be a development project instead of more of a maintenance and rehabilitation project, which means about 8 points in scoring on the application. And we only missed the funding for this grant by 2.7 points. And so it was very hard for our staff to figure out if we should try to do something at Ecker Blufflands for trail development. But again, with development, it doesn't score high enough usually in that right now to take and be into the potential projects that are funded. So that's why we went back at this application. We're working on tweaking our application to kind of address some of the points that the DNR grant contact that we have said that we should improve. And then we slightly increased the overall cost of the project to be $123,550. So this would be an 80-20% grant. So 80% of it would be covered by the DNR. So in short, it would be about 1,100 feet of ADA accessible trail along the west property line of Orff, kind of up on the top of the hill, so that there was a nice view of Bass Lake. And then this would essentially go from that point and where it goes into some terrain that's no longer ADA accessible, with a gravel trail to go down to connect to the existing boardwalk that was built a few years back down along the shoreline. And so it would make that connection down to the point on the lake and also the fishing pier that is down there. And there's several interpretive panels scattered throughout along this trail that it would also connect. So that's what we're looking at. And normally these grants are, at least in the past, have been due May 1st. This year they're due March 1st. So that's why you're seeing it ahead of time. Any questions?
Go ahead.
I move that we adopt the resolution supporting 2026 Wisconsin DNR Recreational Trails Program grant application for Orr Family Overlook Trail improvements.
So we have a motion, we have a second. Any discussion? Go ahead.
Just one, Jason, in the event that this gets approved, do you have any sense of timing when you'll know?
So we won't know until about September, so it would be construction in '27.
All right.
All right.
And we don't plan on coming back with any extra funding request or anything like that. It would all be budget or fund balance through parks.
Okay. All right, any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion carries. Unanimous. Thank you. So our next item of business is update on the 2025 water quality monitoring and land and water conservation.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to first talk about a plan, groundwater protection plan that we're working on. And this is the type of, we have a lot of data that you'll see some of when Patty speaks. And one of the things that we've been working to, Jason's been pushing me to do this, is to try to look forward to what are we going to do about the problem. So this plan was an effort to try to figure out what could be done to work on our nitrates. And we were able to get a grant to work in this specific area around the Roberts-Hammond area. And the grant format was such to describe the problem, identify and rank the sources of nitrates, evaluate solutions, and then also determine costs. And this particular area so happens to be is probably our most affected area of the county. Two municipal wells, the two green and the yellow ones that you can see there in the slide, are Roberts wells that have been increasing for over 20 years. And eventually they're going to exceed the limit, and they'll have a problem at that point. They're since now drilled a deeper well, and it's lower. But Hammond also has an increasing nitrate problem in their well. So those were important aspects to get the grant ranked. But we also have a very large number of wells. We have 619 samples from this area that we've collected over the years, that in the Twin Lakes and in the headwaters, we have well over 30% of those wells exceed the drinking limit. That's very much higher than the county average, which is 10 to 12 to 13% of the wells. So this particular area is quite a bit more impacted for some reason, and that's some of the work that we tried to figure out. All of these wells, the municipal wells as well as the private wells, all get their water from this Prairie du Chien aquifer, this blue layer. And that whole layer is fairly high in nitrates. It's karst, and so the water moves around a lot, moves from one area to another. The municipalities are now drilling deeper down into the sandstone, which is beneath it and is not a karst feature. And they're able to get cleaner water that way. However, that does not help all the residents. It's just too expensive to dig that deep. Matter of fact, there's a well replacement program, if implemented for every well in this particular project area, not the whole county. If you tried to fix every well in the county that was over 10, it'd be $20 million. It's about $9.5 million to fix the wells, to dig every well in this project area deeper down into that sandstone. So that's really not a viable option. The nitrate levels in the wells are directly associated with the amount of load that they're getting above for over a period of time, many years of load. And so even if you have a background level of 1 part per million nitrate in your groundwater, that area receives about a pound, 1.6 pounds per acre every year. But as your nitrate average goes up, your load goes up too. So, you know, we've got the Emerald Town Hall, which we always talk about, 40 parts per million at times. Well, there's something going on. You get 60 pounds of load in that particular area to give you that much concentration. Definitely, you can use these data to try to figure out what's going on in the area around the wells. So I use that concept to calculate what is the load in this whole Huck 12, all three of them. And I came up with large numbers, 750,000 pounds of nitrogen. And you're thinking, can that even be accurate, you know? Well, if you take, we have excellent spatial analysis tools now with GIS, and Patty knows how to use them, thank God, because I certainly do not. And she's able to tell me how much acres we have of all these different things and more. We're able to create incredibly detailed layers, and then I can look up and determine through, research papers and such, what's the losses associated with the different land uses that we have in that area, and then assign it. So, long story short, we put all that together. Remember, we calculated what the load was using the water samples. And when I used the baseline data, we were come very close to what was predicted with the water. Well, the reason to go through that exercise, we're within 1.5%, 2%. The reason to go through that exercise is now I have the baseline data, I have that model that I can use. And it turned out, corn is probably the biggest leaching crop that we have. And then it kind of breaks down as I have in this table. This particular breakdown would only really be relevant for this watershed, but a person could do it on a larger area if they wanted. It's a lot of work. This basic breakdown is very similar to what's found statewide. These are the main agencies that work with water, DNR, USGS, Extension, Wisconsin Coordinating Council. Basically, they've come to that conclusion. It's about 9% septic, 90% agriculture, and other factors coming in there too. So what we found is very consistent with what has been found elsewhere in the state. So we took that model that was created, the baseline in yellow, and I created 4 scenarios that focused on the biggest contributors that we have. Corn, manure, and septic systems, and began to play scenarios in that model to determine what do we have to do to fix the groundwater before we start throwing money at it. Let's try to figure out what would actually pencil out on paper first. So I fed all those numbers, the scenarios, increased acreage of certain crops, decreased fertilizer applications, decreased leaching through cover crop applications, and those kinds of DMPs that were mentioned there. And if we increased all those increasing factors, obviously we get about a 20% increase in leaching. We get a big load. But we could also get about a 21% decrease through 50% implementation of BMPs. And that gets better and better the more you do, but it gets more expensive, obviously. So you can take these loads, feed them back through the equation, and it'll tell you what would the nitrates be in the ground. Right now, this yellow is what we have now. And with 50% implementation of 3 basic practices, we could reduce the concentration quite a bit. I should also know that we've got excellent data in place now to show that right now we're increasing in nitrate. So what we should do is we should be trying to stop that and actually get a decrease. But if we could stop the increase, that would be an achievement. Obviously, before you start going downhill, you have to at least flatten off. So we were able to determine what would the nitrate average be if we implemented those practices. point out, if we don't do much, if we just ignore the problem, we could end up with an average over the drinking limit for the whole area. That was a worst case scenario. So then we're also able to use some statistics and determine what would the percentage of wells be if we implemented all these BMPs. So right now, as I was mentioning before, we got over 30% of the wells in some of these Huck 12s are over the drinking limit. And then real close by, and it's mainly due to soils, these are a lot heavier soils over here in that Baldwin Rush River area, that's only running 6%, which isn't really that alarming. There's a few wells, could use some work. Even that area dropped a little bit, but it wasn't as responsive as the Twin Lakes area. So we're able to decrease the number of homes that would have drinking water over the limit from 492 to 365. So that would be quite a dramatic impact. And if that actually happened, I read these papers all the time, and I don't know anybody that's done that in an area, actually target an area and gotten those kinds of results. The reason this particular area, the headwaters, does not look that much better, even with a pretty big investment of practices, is because of the nature of the statistics. So in that particular case, we're real close to 10 right now. And so if I move that mean over to the left, it doesn't pull that many more samples under 10, just because of we have a wide variation in the samples that we have out in the field. And so it's going to take a real long-term effort in that particular area to fix that. Kind of what I summarized to, if we wanted to try to take something like this on, we would probably just target those two Huck 12s that have the biggest problem. And my intent was to try to prepare this plan and then submit it for funding with USDA. That would allow us to do multiple year contracts with landowners. Right now, we don't do that. We do single year contracts, just due to that fits our budget cycle and such more. We don't really have a mechanism set up to do multiple years, and that it gets very complicated. The feds aren't as concerned about going over the budget and going into deficit. But multiple year contracts are very helpful if you're trying to do something big like this, because if you get 10 contracts a year, well, it doesn't seem like very many, but after the second year, maybe you got 20, and then you got 30. Pretty soon you're covering the area you need to cover. The guys that you did the first year are still under contract. So you can build your effort much more effectively than through a single year contract type system that we work under right now. They also would provide 5 years of money. Very few grants provide that kind of money that we have access to now. If you get 2 years out of them, maybe 3 as you're really pushing it. They also would provide technical assistance, which is needed. You can have all the money in the world if you don't have staff to say, hey, this is your job. It generally doesn't get done as effectively. And then, of course, there's outreach and education to reach producers, to talk to them about these kinds of things, educate them. Some of these practices take some discussion, take some learning. They have to kind of advance how they're thinking about their nitrogen management, those kind of things. It isn't just a matter of paying them. They're going to have to learn how to do some of these things. And then, of course, monitoring should be part of any big project too, to do wells, see if we actually are getting those results that I predict would happen if we could reduce the load. And so these are all, I've already drafted these parts of the plan. We're just working now to get it into the format that the USDA wants. Kind of a relative cost that I've predicted for this is about $270,000 a year for 5 years. It's about $1.4 million. When I showed this to USDA, they thought I was too low, so I'd have to bump it up a little bit. But the plan is to get the get this accepted in their format, as they're very specific about that. And then we would be eligible for something like this. And at that time, I would come back to the board and look for a resolution for that. So this is more of an education of what is it going to take to fix some of these problems that we hear about all the time. It's going to take a fair amount. Some of the things that we learned with this work was that it really is a pretty significant problem to solve, because it's going to require not just one or two spot treatments. It's going to take some learning and some changes of practices. And so it's a multiple year project. The Prairie du Chien aquifer is a great aquifer that we have that really provides excellent water for our residents, but that water is pretty much impacted. And if we want to continue to use that aquifer as intended, for a good quality water, we're going to have to do something. Losses from agriculture is where we're going to have to focus. Drilling wells deeper is not going to solve this problem. I think they have like 10 million for the whole state to do that program. And, it fixes a few wells, and it's not going to solve this problem. Treatment at the tap is important, but it also will not solve this problem. That's something we work with landowners so that they can ensure safety, but it doesn't solve the problem either. But agricultural BMPs can do something. They can solve this. We think they can slow the increase and probably start a decreasing trend over time. So that is what we learned at school this week. Any questions?
Two questions, Tim. Thank you, by the way, for that presentation. Very good. Can you scroll back to
Sure.
page 9, please?
Tell me when.
Keep going. There,
Yeah.
stop right there. Okay. Corn causes 71% of the problem, according to this. Okay. Is that because there's more corn raised in this area than any other product, or is it every bushel of corn is 71%?
Good question. What we have in this particular watershed, this particular area, is a lot more continuous corn.
Okay.
And when you have continuous corn, you have multiple things happening. For example, average for corn is about 32 pounds lost out of corn. It takes a lot of nitrogen to grow corn, and 32 pounds isn't really that big of a deal, because a lot of people are putting 180, 200 almost on corn. So losing 30 doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but it's just this continuous every year. So if you go corn and then you grow soybeans loses about 9. If you do that rotation, you're already half, darn near half, right? Because it's 9 plus 32 divided by 2. If you use cover crops on your soybeans, that takes it from 9 down to 1. So now you got 32 plus 1, and now you're down to 18 pounds. So if you start to work these various practices in, your overall equation goes down, your loss goes down. So one of the questions that I know I had to answer, and I sat there and agonized over it for a long time, is why are the nitrates so high in this area, not everywhere else? So if you drive around the county, you wouldn't know what you were looking at, right? There's corn there, there's soybeans there, and there's corn over there, and there's soybeans over there. But it turns out it's more of a rotation is one thing, but there's also a high degree of vulnerability here with shallow depth to groundwater, very high degree of drainage. And then you also, as soon as it hits, it's into that karst, and so it distributes itself. Those are some factors. If you look at some of the other areas, like over in Glenwood, they have all just the same crops as over here, but the soils aren't the same. So the soils don't take water over in that area. This is like a perfect storm of leachable soils, high-value corn grown, and a lot of it not in rotation, so it's corn after corn after corn on leachable soils. So that's primarily the explanation.
Does it make a difference what kind of, how you put the nitrogen on? Is urea better than anhydrous or whatever, or is it just a blank blanket this is.
Yeah, there's a lot of specifics. A lot of things do help. One is trying to, delay your application to get it as close to when the crop needs it as possible. And then nitrification inhibitors have been shown to be quite effective. I've got this other work that we're doing with agronomists, and they're getting excellent yields with a little bit less nitrogen through using some of these real simple things, trying to put more of it on during side dress, using nitrification inhibitors to try to keep it out of the nitrate form for as long as possible. That's another interesting thing that happens when you go to continuous corn. The soil changes, the microflora change, and it actually will take, if you take urea and apply it, it'll convert it to nitrate weeks faster than if you had a field next to it that was in a rotation. So the bacteria for nitrification build up in that corn situation. So there's all kinds of little nuances that we'll try to work into a program for people to, if we get into this cost sharing for this kind of a thing.
How long would it take to see an improvement if we move into some of these?
It's going to take years.
Weeks or years or
It's going to take
decades or-
years. However, I think it'd be faster than most people would think, because most of the time when you think groundwater, you're just thinking this is going to be a career ender. You could work on it for your whole career, right? And you might get some, but this is different because everything goes a little faster in the karst. And if you take, I think you might, before the end of the project, first 5 years, I think they might start to see some changes. It really does recharge pretty quickly. So, yeah, I think it could be faster than what we previously think. We haven't been able to use a groundwater model on any of these watersheds that have karst because they just don't fit. It doesn't work. The groundwater models that exist that you can get all are just typical sand model, everything moves in mass and moves like 2 feet a year or something like that. So you all remember that when the lake popped a hole in Pine Lake and all drained out the bottom of it, and DNR jumped about a couple 5-gallon jugs of dye down that, and it never came out. And then about 2 months later, it showed up in Spring Valley. Well, I calculated that. That's 800 feet a year. No, 800 feet a week or something, a day. I calculated it out. It was a tremendous speed.
Yeah.
If you do that distance, and it was like 2 months. Yeah, it was like 800 feet a day. Well, it's 24/7. It's just sitting over there moving. So in karst systems, I think we could see faster. But that's just there isn't a lot of things done on karst. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for your good question. You always get some good ones.
Before you go, one more thing. In this watershed area, how much of our fields that we have are in NMP plans?
How many? I looked at that. It isn't a very high percentage.
It isn't? Okay.
It is not. No. Bomaz has some of their fields in here. I should have known that, but it isn't more than 5-10%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
you're popular.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to ask what Ryan just asked. It strikes me that there's a lot of work that would have to be done. I don't see any reason not to go forward with this. But it does strike me you've got some cultural and education. There's financial impact here. We've got a lot of citizens that want to see us act and act quickly. They want it done now. In working with some of our ag producers, are there some incentives beyond financial that we can give them? Is there any recognition? I mean, there's a program in Minnesota that you can apply for, and you, as an ag producer, you can put a sign in front of your place. I can't remember what they call it, a clean water or something. But it acknowledges to the public that the practices here help to not just feed your family, but support good groundwater practices.
We do not have anything like that now, but I think it would be a good thing to develop something like that. And the reason I say that is because as soon as you come out with a program, then farmers think you're, singling them out. And you kind of are. But the fact is it's not easy to do these practices. I mean, there's extra work to do it. And I think it would be good to do something. I think we should figure out a way and put it in the plan.
And probably asking them was the right answer.
Yeah,
but,
that's a
you
good
know,
idea.
If culturally you have a group of people who, they're not participating
Mm-hmm.
now, even though there's incentives. And so if we're wanting rapid uptake and we're not increasing the incentives, it strikes me that we need to be asking them what more needs to be done.
Yeah.
So I'll just leave it there, but
Yeah.
I just don't see any reason, Tim, why we don't move and move fast. I did a quick calculation. You said there were 619 samples,
Yep.
over 30% of the drinking limit. I installed a little RO system for my daughter. It cost me $1,500. That total comes to close to $1 million just for
Yeah.
those. We have no idea how many of them are already on an RO system.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a once and done thing, but it strikes me that this is less expensive. It's the prevention
Mm-hmm.
versus the cure kind of a thing.
Right. And we also have a pretty good survey that we might have talked about at a previous meeting that's kind of ongoing. We're trying to learn who's using what, how effective they are, and those kinds of things. So we're trying to work with the landowners now to understand the treatment to see if it is as effective as we might think it is. And sometimes I definitely want to know if it's not effective, learn about that, so that people can actually safely protect themselves in these rural areas, because it's not gonna fix itself really quickly.
Right, right. So for you, you presented us something here with financial numbers and things. So for you, assuming that you get support, what do you need from this committee? And maybe that's.
Once we
turn it over to
once we
Chair.
have this plan done and we turn it in and we're gonna be eligible, then we'll probably come back and look for resolution of support, from the governing body. And then I'd also be going to the towns, the affected towns, looking for that. And,
Good. Well, I'll just ask for my fellow supervisors to hear from you about what you think the full board needs to know about this kind of topic. It affects the rural areas more than the urban areas, but ultimately, we're all pulling from the same groundwater source. So,
I think Tim's presentation tonight, maybe in an abbreviated form, but I think that's an eye-opener, I think, to all of the board members. That yes, something has to be done, and yes, there are grants for it, and yes, Tim, write those grants.
I could probably work it down a little bit.
I would definitely agree with that. I think this is something that, with the concerns and where the county has currently been going and looking at the charts and graphs of the increase in nitrate issues, I think this is something we should share with the general board to bring them up to speed, so that there's a better understanding from everybody of what's happening here. The other question I had was, when you get out and you're dealing with all this, you've brought a lot of information here. How much do the producers understand, or where are they, do you see them understanding what's going on and where we need to go, or is everybody still fairly naive to all of
No.
this?
I mean, I'm working with agronomists who would then work with the landowners, and some of the landowners are way ahead on some of this stuff. Part of the problem is some of the variation that you see in a field. And so when you have a sandy area in a field and you farm the whole field as if it was a sill loam soil, you're going to lose a lot. And I think that's part of what we have going on here. And so there are actually things we can do with USDA program cost share that could address some of those areas. They actually pay quite well to take areas out that are high leachable, risk. And so there are some of those kinds of programs that we don't have as a county program that could be implemented specifically to those areas. So, yeah, a lot of the farmers, they have a good handle on their, they know all the terms of, the leaching and they've had to deal with this every time it rains. Oh, I just put my fertilizer on and now it leached, and so they know all this stuff fairly well. It's just a matter of trying to show them ways that they can possibly reduce without risk. That's really where it's at. Because if you reduce without a good plan, you could really reduce your yield. So that's what we don't want. So.
Well, I guess looking at this, I again really want to thank you and everyone that's been working on this project, because it is a real high concern, and it's something we, as county board members, really have to look at seriously for the long-term impact for everybody within the county.
Right. I mean, we've been working on nitrates for a long time, but it really, I think we just kind of had to sit down and figure out, well, what is it going to take? That's what this was all about.
I guess as we forge ahead, we definitely, I believe, at least from this committee, would end up supporting anything to move ahead with this, to look at whatever programming or whatever grants, applications, or things that we need to do to put this in the forefront for something that would be something that we need to prioritize, I guess would be the easiest way to say it. So as we please, work, Jason and everyone to keep forging ahead on this particular issue for sure, and keep us in the loop. And if there's things that you need from our committee or further up, please bring them forward so we can continue.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add, this plan was like a $50,000 grant to write the plan. It's very extensive, very labor intensive. Patty and Tim have done all the work pretty much, and that a little bit with Evan too. So we kind of need to get that plan done before we can get to that funding level with the USDA. So that's what they're working through, and I think they're very close. It's just a formatting to do so, but yeah, we're moving forward, trying to do whatever we can to keep it going as fast as possible.
Thank you, Jason.
Hi, I'm Patty Schrank, the Water Resource Specialist. Thank you for inviting me to give an update on the 2025 drinking water programs that we had going on last year. So I'm going to take it a little bit back to basics and describe the why are Tim and I working on that groundwater plan. And it all comes back to drinking water. So groundwater is the only source of drinking water for St. Croix County and the residents in it, which means everything that we drink comes from these water stored underground in our aquifers. Nitrate is the most common groundwater contaminant in Wisconsin and in St. Croix County. So nitrate is one of our biggest concerns when it comes to drinking water. We do have 3 different drinking water programs that are targeted at helping our residents learn more about contamination, specifically in the form of nitrates, help them educate and improve their knowledge on that aspect. So we have the nitrate screening clinics, the septic density study, and then the community groundwater monitoring program, the CGMP, which I'll go over today. So I know you probably all know what nitrates are, but I was once told never to underestimate the importance of telling people something they already know or reminding them on something that might help influence their understanding of why you do a certain thing. So nitrates are a natural compound. They are found naturally in soil and in rocks, and they're actually very essential for plants. So nitrate is the reason that farmers have been able to sustain the food that we eat. However, when applied in excess, that's when we see issues. So if you start to apply too much in the form of fertilizers, manure, or leaky septic systems, that's when nitrates are vulnerable to leaching into the groundwater. And that's because nitrates are very soluble in water. They don't want to bind to the soils. They instead go into the water, and then as water percolates through the soils, they just follow through and end up in our aquifers that we drink. The impact on nitrates on human health is intricately related to the concentrations that you consume. So in small concentrations, nitrates are very common, and they probably won't cause any adverse health effects. However, when you're consuming large quantities of nitrates, so high concentrations, or over long periods of time at high concentrations chronically, that's when you start to see negative health impacts of nitrates. So consuming too many nitrates can be harmful to human health, specifically for infants. For infants, high nitrates can actually be fatal due to blue baby syndrome. So that's where nitrates interfere with the blood's ability to carry oxygen, and the babies aren't able to have enough oxygen in their blood to support breathing and the normal bodily functions that we do as adults. So it can lead to mortality if it's not caught soon enough. It can also lead to reproductive and developmental issues with pregnant women and their fetuses. And also, everybody could have chances of getting thyroid dysfunction as a result of consumption of high nitrates over chronic periods, as well as certain cancers, specifically colorectal. So the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, does have a drinking water standard of 10 milligrams per liter. I'll probably mention that a million times throughout the slide. But they also recommend that that nitrates be tested for annually by private homeowners. So 50% of St. Croix County residents do rely on their own private wells. So why we put on these free nitrate screening clinics is it provides a very convenient, very affordable opportunity for homeowners to have their water screened for nitrates. We've been doing these nitrate clinics since 2020. There's been a total of 30 clinics. This year we did 8, which was expanding it from the previous 5 per year. And we have over 2,000 water samples that we've screened for nitrates. This year we screened 469 from 448 different addresses. So about 20 people showed up to 2 clinics, so they went to multiple. This is an increase in 100 samples then from what we did last year, and I think that's a result of expanding it and having those additional water clinics. As you can see from the pie chart, they're all pretty well attended. The highest attendance was Baldwin and New Richmond. The lowest attendance was at Glenwood City, and that's because it was Glenwood Elementary School. It was done through public health, so that's the only one that I didn't do. I just calibrated the meter for them, but it was done at the elementary school. But overall, we did a lot of them, and we tried to pick more rural locations this year. So we targeted Wilson and Forest, kind of 2 corners that haven't had an opportunity. So looking at the data, I do want to mention one thing in particular. For these events, I do use a handheld meter. It's a YSI meter with a nitrate probe. This is a very fast and convenient way to give people in-person nitrate results. However, it is not a standardized laboratory test. So although it's a reliable screening tool, it's not a standardized laboratory test. It is associated with some error that could be assigned in determining these concentrations. And in my personal opinion, I do think it tends to give nitrates a little bit of a higher concentration than what they're normally seen. So the average nitrates from our 2025 nitrate clinics was 7.77 milligrams per liter. And that's higher than the state average of about 5 milligrams per liter. The majority of people that we screened were under 10 milligrams per liter, the EPA drinking water standard. The majority of people fell into this 5.1 to 10 milligram per liter grouping. But that does still show that impact of land use making its way into a majority of people's well water that they're drinking, because what you would see naturally is probably 0 to 2 milligrams per liter. A lot of people would probably say it's closer to 0 to 1 is what you would see in a natural system. As for the people who were above the drinking water standard, we had 27% of our samples that were screened were above the drinking water standard. That accounts for about 120 of the 448 people who attended our clinics. So it's a pretty high number. Now, we can also use this data to put it into a map to help us deduct where nitrate-sensitive areas are. So this method of mapping townships by tier status was requested by, in 2020 by the Wisconsin DNR. It was proposed, and it was modeled after the Minnesota Department of Agriculture did something very similar, where a tier 1 status is the most nitrate sensitive, so the biggest problem children are going to be the red. That's where greater than 10% of the wells exceed 10 milligrams per liter, and the average nitrates are greater than 5.4. The yellowy orange is going to be our tier 2. That's where greater than 5% of the wells exceed that drinking water standard, or the nitrates are greater than 5.4. And then the blue are your tier 3. These are the ones you don't have to worry about as much. You have the majority of the wells are under the drinking water standard, and the average nitrates are less than 5.4. So we have a few of each of these different categories, but you can see the tier 1 is what kind of dominates our county. Now, while I have this slide up, I'd also like to address the 10 Mile Creek Excel Solar Project. I know in the past the board has had questions about nitrates in and around the proposed solar fields. Those fields are proposed to go in up here in the the southern portion of Erin Prairie, with a few in the northern portion of Hammond. You can tell both of these townships are in that tier 1 classification where they're high nitrate sensitive, and they already have high nitrates that are affecting residents and their drinking water. So I also did look at nutrient management plans within the solar fields, and there were 2 fields that had nutrient management plans that make up about 100 acres of the fields that are proposed to turn to solar. So online I saw the solar proposal has like almost 3,000 acres. So if you're looking at only 100 acres have nutrient management plan, that's pretty small. But we also do have a trim grant right now for any fields within the Kinnickinnick River headwaters, and that's where these fields occur. And there are a lot of fields that are planning to do or are in the proposed plan for solar that do have cover crops or an agreement to do cover crops through our Kinnickinnick Headwaters trim grant. But overall, when it comes to groundwater and nitrate contamination, it's really these fields, if they're in agriculture, they're adding manures and fertilizers, which is a source of nitrates that can leach. If it's converted to prairie, it should reduce a lot of that nitrate leaching at those particular locations. Just to summarize or finish up on the nitrate clinics, I do want to plug our 2026 events. We have 6 events proposed for 2026 so far, starting with a workshop next month called Know Your Water. It's a nitrate awareness workshop. So in addition to people coming and being able to bring their water samples, drop them off and get them screened, they're also able to listen to some presentations that we have lined up. So I'll give a presentation on nitrates and what we see in our county, probably some similar slides to what you're seeing today. Genevieve with Public Health, she's going to be giving a talk about the health implications. And then we've invited Kayla, she's the groundwater specialist at UW-Stevens Point, to talk about testing and treatment options for nitrates. And then Tim will finish it up by talking about what we're doing about nitrates and some of the ways that the county can help reduce nitrates. So that's coming up on Wednesday, February 11th from 1 to 4:30 in Baldwin. And then lastly, this QR code is for the water survey that we have going on. Tim mentioned it, that we have that. It's a good way to get an idea of what people think about their water quality, what types of treatments they use, what types of treatments they think are effective at removing things. If you haven't done that yet, I highly recommend that you take that opportunity to fill it out. So moving on, the next study that I want to introduce is our septic density study, which is designed to assess how the density of septic systems may influence drinking water quality. So for this study, we collected water samples and analyzed them using chemical source tracing methods. This approach allows us to look beyond nitrates. So we are able to identify indicator chemicals that are commonly associated with agricultural activities or septic system indicators, helping us better understand the source of contamination at different locations. So this test was done by UW-Stevens Point, are the ones who conduct this type of indicator study. So this is a continuation off of what we did in 2024, which we looked at subdivisions. So subdivisions with a density of about 2 acres per septic. And we found that agricultural inputs were still present even after development. One of the things we realized were that all the subdivisions that we looked at were about 25 years old. So for 2025, we wanted to go a little bit older, see if we look at an older subdivision, if you see less of that agricultural impact and more of the septic impact. In addition, the artificial sweeteners, so one of the septic indicators, were more common in subdivisions, as we kind of expect. However, in rural housing, we noticed that there were some really high levels of artificial sweeteners, which led us to want to look more at septic spreading. Were these really high values in the rural areas related to their septic, or is it from septic spreading being spread on a field nearby and then getting into the water that way? So those were kind of the two things we really wanted to look at, were those older subdivisions in the table, that's the top column, the rural near septic spreading, and then we also included municipal sources as kind of like a control to see what these are in those deeper wells that are for more people. And so what it is able to look at when we do these chemical source tracing methods is it can identify certain chemicals originating from agricultural pesticides, such as allichlor and metolachlor. It can also look at the indicators of POUTs, which are private on-site wastewater treatment systems, so those are our septic indicators. Asulfame and sucralose are artificial sweeteners. Caffeine, obviously, from coffee, tea, and energy drinks. And then sulfamethoxazole is an antibiotic. So that kind of just describes, we're looking at the ag indicators up here and then the POUTS indicators down here. One thing to point out is our control, the municipals, were lowest in nitrates, and they had the lowest concentration and prevalence of all the indicators, agricultural and septic. Each of the indicators has 2 numbers on this table. The one on the left is going to be the concentration. The one on the right is the percent of those samples that had that indicator in it. So low prevalence of the indicators and low concentrations when they're there. For subdivisions that were a little bit older compared to last year, had pretty average nitrates, 5.85, and then they still had prevalence of these agricultural indicators, really telling us that that fingerprint, that mark of agriculture is still in the water. It can linger for a while. The other interesting thing we looked at then were the septic indicators. So asulfame and sucralose, the sweeteners, were the most common septic indicators that were picked up, and they were highest in the subdivisions. However, the rural septic spreading sites actually had higher concentrations and prevalence of caffeine and then the antibiotics. So that's just kind of interesting. Combining the septic density data with what we did last year, and then also what we did back in about 2019 to 2021, where we looked at rural sites that ranged in septic densities of 3 acres to 40 acres per septic system, so much larger lots. You're able to kind of put it together as a full picture. Keep in mind that year-to-year variation exists, so it's not a perfect study, but it's what we have available. So looking at the subdivisions that we looked at in 2024 compared to the subdivisions that we looked at here, you do see that nitrates are higher in the older subdivisions, and they have very similar levels of agricultural indicators, so not much difference there. The rural areas have higher average nitrates, and they also have higher agricultural inputs. And then the rural near septic spreading had kind of like a in-between average nitrate. I should say that these rural near septic spreading had smaller lot sizes than the more rural category. So it was, the lot sizes were about 3 acres per septic system. And then with the Powitz indicators, you do see that between the subdivisions that are 25 years old and the subdivisions that are 50 years old, that those values, the concentrations of the artificial sweeteners in particular, do increase, meaning that you are seeing maybe a more of a contribution of septic in your water the longer that you're there. But overall, these results really show that the presence of agricultural and wastewater contaminants are kind of ubiquitous. They're through a lot of these samples at low levels. And that's because what happens at the surface is connected to the groundwater. And then one kind of disclaimer is that these chemicals are used as source tracers. They do not pose a significant health risk. They serve more as like that geological fingerprint to help us understand land use changes. Okay, the last study that I'm going to talk about is our groundwater monitoring program, the CGMP. This one's really cool, and you're probably all super familiar with it because it's been going on since 2019. So it's the one that we've been doing the longest, and it's the most statistically defensible. We have 160 wells that have been sampled annually every fall by UW Stevens Point. So that is a standardized test. Same with, I should say, septic density was also a standardized lab test too. But it's a standard lab test, so you can really believe the nitrate data that you see there. 2025 was the 7th year of this program, and we're anticipating that it's going to go for 10 years. The average nitrate concentration from 2025 was 5.48. That's right in line with what we've seen in the past. It's the same average that we had last year. And really, the average nitrates haven't changed much over the length of this study. So in 2020 was the lowest nitrates at 5.37. 2021 had the highest nitrates at 5.79. The other two categories do see a change. So the range actually did drop in 2025. This particular sample has always been the highest one in the previous years. So it's the same one that's 37 here, 47 here, and 25 here. So kind of interesting that that particular well did drop so much, but even though it dropped almost, 20 milligrams per liter, it did not change that average nitrate, which is because more wells were above that 10 milligram per liter EPA drinking water standard this year. So we had 15% of the samples that exceeded that drinking water standard this year. That's more than we had seen in the past. So that's kind of the biggest change this year that's observed in these numbers. So where are these nitrates and what are the concentrations? Can we find any geological patterns? And we absolutely can. So this map is looking at nitrates are plotted, milligrams per liter. The white dots are going to be any well samples that had nitrates less than 1, so what you would see in the background. And you can see white dots are speckled all around kind of like the perimeter of our county. Green dots represent samples that had nitrates between 1.1 and 5 milligrams per liter. Those are also kind of speckled around the perimeter of our county with a few more kind of going into the center. The yellowy orange represents 5.1 to 9.9 milligrams per liter, and those are kind of speckled throughout the county. Red are the samples that exceed the drinking water standard of 10. And those are kind of concentrated more towards the center of our county. If I were to draw an oblong circle diagonally through the county, that would cover the swath of where we see these high nitrates emerging. This spatial distribution has remained consistent over the past 7 years. It aligns really well with our geological patterns such as land use, shallow well depths, and then tapping into that Prairie du Chien aquifer. So really exciting is the trend data. You need 6 years of data to be able to run trend statistics, and the more data you have, the better. So the longer your year data is, the better. So we did run it last year, but this year we got more. So I use a man Kendall test for trend. I run it in R, and it gives me a Kendall's tau. So the tau is used to determine your trend strength. The tau can range from -1 to 1. If it's a negative value, that means it's a negative trend, meaning the nitrates are decreasing. That's good. If it's a positive number, it means it's a positive trend. That means nitrates are increasing. That's bad. And then we can use the number of the tau that it's generated to tell us if the trend is strong, moderate, weak, or no trend. I should address that there's also a no change. No change is a sample that literally hasn't changed from 2019. This is very common in samples that are 0.1. So if we sampled a well in 2019 and it was 0.1, it has most likely stayed 0.1. It's been very consistent, and that's when we see no change. And then no trend is literally there's no trend visible. 1 year it's 6, the next year it's 4, the next year it's 7. You can't identify a trend. But overall, the most common emerging trend are these increasing nitrates, the positive trends. Both weak and strong are the strongest trends that we're picking up. And if you're very statistics-minded, you might say that's all well and good, but what's statistically significant? And I got you. I used a p-value of p of 0.05. We identified 34 wells that had a statistically significant change. So 8 of the wells were a statistically significant decrease, but 28 of the wells were a statistically significant increase in nitrate concentrations. In addition to more wells increasing, they are increasing at a slightly higher rate. So if you look at the magnitude of the decreasing wells, on average, these 8 decreased about -1.56 milligrams per liter, compared to the increasing wells increased about 1.82 milligrams per liter from 2019 to 2025. So I think that's kind of the most compelling aspect of this trend data. And then obviously the more data you have, the longer you look at this trend, the better you can see that trend. So looking at, this is the same Roberts well, municipal well, that's been increasing over 24 years. If you look at it for a short period of time, you may see a different trend than when you put it all together. So for instance, if you look 2014 to 2021, you might think, oh, it's decreasing. But once you put it all together, you can see a really well-emerging trend. And so that's likely what will happen with the more data that we collect towards the CGMP. But overall, this data set is really valuable to the county. It shows it's geographically diverse, it's spatially inclusive, and it's statistically defensible. So thank you for allowing us to do this study, and I hope we can continue to do it for the next 10 years, or next 3 years. That's all I have. I can take questions.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple things. Patty, thank you. This is very helpful. You know, I think it's a real credit to the county staff, to you, to Tim, and all of the people that have voluntarily participated in this. It goes back to maybe some early activists that are in the crowd that started with an unfortunate spill that caused them to ask some questions. So all of that is very good. The presentation that you're talking about giving, it was in the prior comments. Will you be recording any of that?
I'm not sure.
Educational session?
I'm sure we could.
You know, I think it's the kind of thing that people, some of this is a little overwhelming and they might need to hear things twice, and also making it shareable. If someone, for example, were to go to one of your free testing clinics and say, well, what does this high number mean?
Yeah.
We could refer them back to something, you know, whether it's a recording or something.
Certainly.
But I'm also wondering about the whole concept of nitrates in the water. We all get alarmed because we think we're drinking clean water. We get a high nitrate reading. But people live very busy lives. So, you know, imagine the person that's doing the drive-through and getting bacon on their breakfast sandwich, and then in the afternoon stopping by Quick Trip and getting their lunch meat sandwich. Now we've got more nitrates going on. And maybe they're grilling pork chops, and you know, there's a whole bunch of things that can contribute to it. So it seems to me that maybe the health department can educate on that aspect as well.
Yeah.
Because it's not just the water.
Certainly.
So,
Yep.
anyway, just some feedback. This is outstanding information.
Great.
You know, getting something longitudinal over time, we need to keep doing this. in my opinion.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Just an observation, not a question, but as you were speaking and Tim was speaking too, I'm thinking, you know, for the last couple of years, we have heard an awful lot about the solar array.
Mhm.
We've seen people get very, very excited and then even get more excited than that from time to time. And the excitement comes from, we don't want to look at it. We don't want to see it. It probably won't hurt them. I mean, it's like when your neighbor paints their house an ugly color. It don't hurt you. It just looks ugly. Here's something we can't see, but something that we know causes health issues. And we know it causes health issues at every stage of life, from blue babies to, you know, cantankerous old people. And we don't have many people excited about it. We don't have many people beating down the doors, a few, but not many. So my challenge to both of you is come up with a plan that gets people excited,
Okay.
really excited, to the point where they say, we can't put up with this any longer. And it's not because we don't want to look at it, it's because we don't want to drink it,
Yeah.
you know, and so that's
Yeah,
my
that's a good input.
comment. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Just a follow-up to the point Supervisor Van Summer was making. What do the people say at the clinics when you tell them their drinking water is over 10 parts per million and that's over the drinking water standard?
It's hard. They're definitely, you can see a change in their reaction. It's sadness, disappointment, worry, a lot of that. People will often ask, like, well, what next? And that's where we do provide UW-Stevens Point test kits. We recommend that, since we're doing just a screening, we recommend they have the nitrates confirmed through a standardized lab test. And then we do provide information on treatment systems. And if they have different, I guess, financial abilities, we do have the ARPA grant, so we give them that information as well, as something they could look into as well. But it's not a good reaction when you have to give somebody the news that the nitrates are screening higher than 10.
So listening to these two presentations and looking back at, especially slide 7 from Tim, if we were to look at how best to look at long-term plans for the county, our best bet, after running through your numbers, would be to try to drive development in the Roberts and the east side of Roberts as much as we possibly can. Because if we have septic at 20 pounds per system per year, and then we're able to take between 60 and 90 pounds per acre off, we're way ahead. So trying to find a way to drive development in that area would be the best for that area.
Yes and no. It'd be better probably than continuous corn. However, septic systems still can introduce nitrates, so they still are a culprit. It's a smaller percentage compared to agriculture, but it still can introduce. I'd rather you put prairie or parks, but yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that I noticed in your report that I was curious about was you had seen a definite increases in artificial sweeteners.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, do you, as part of this, I was trying to read the chart, and one of the things that you had, it looked like you also had for municipal, was one of the outcomes. There you go. And you're down fairly low at those. Now,
Absolutely.
how are you testing those? Are those, because normally on a municipal system, aren't you reintroducing your outflows back into a some form of a body of water, whether river, stream, lake, however it's done? that where you're pulling these from, or where's your pull point? Because the other ones are,
Yep.
okay, go ahead.
We pulled from, for the municipal, mostly town halls, or that's kind of where we went, or the city halls. So from a building, we took a water sample from a kitchen sink in one of the buildings.
They're testing inflows, not the outflow.
Okay. Very good. Out of curiosity, because of the situation we're seeing coming up in the rural, have you done any testing of effluent testing to see, for specifically for sucrose and the artificial sweeteners?
We have not, no.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And is it because they're in a deeper aquifer or because of pretreatment that those municipals are lower?
Most likely, the wells are drilled deeper. Oftentimes municipal, since they're high capacity, they go deeper. That's protective. I don't know of many of them that have treatment systems or what the treatment would be, but my guess would be that it's just a deeper well. Do you know, Tim? Deeper. Mm-hmm.
Does anyone have anything else? Well, another outstanding report. Thank you
Wonderful.
very much.
Yes, thank you for your time.
Well put together. So, and we'd be moving on to business item number 3, the resolution opposing the rezoning request pending before the Village of North Hudson by Railroad Properties of Hudson LLC for parcel as described in the in item 3.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just like to take and provide a little background on this. I think everybody's familiar with the railroad trestle property. We had maps and that a few months ago before the committee. And we've also been, as community development, assisting in rewriting the comprehensive plan for the Village of North Hudson over the last year. Just on January 6th here, and that the Village of North Hudson adopted that plan. But that's completely separate from this, but it is relevant because the Village of North Hudson previous plan was done in 2006, I believe. And there were some inconsistencies noted between the old comprehensive plan, like that sliver on the south side of the trestle was not actually colored anything on their future land use map. So it was like missed and not guided. And then there was also some zoning questions. So Gina Alberti, the Village of North Hudson clerk, went back all the way into the 70s as far as what that property had been guided and what it had been zoned. And I think she actually went back farther than that even, but in the early 70s, the property was changed to conservancy zoning. And at that time, and that it had also been still used as a railroad track, so it was used for an industrial district. And so at some point, the village changed the zoning of it to industrial. And then going from there, the property was up for sale. So the county retained some of the ownership around the property back in 1964. So that was prior to the conservancy zoning. The early 70s was a very common time when local towns and municipalities first adopted general zoning. So from 1970 to 1975, that's when they were all going through that process of creating maps. And so it could have been through a comprehensive rewrite that the property was actually changed to conservancy zoning or back to industrial zoning. It wouldn't have required any public hearing. It'd be very similar to back to what the county did in 2019. So it's a public hearing on the whole ordinance, not just on the rezone of that one parcel. So fast forwarding, and that the county had some inquiries and that about the trestle bridge. So they had a structural analysis done on it, I believe in 2010, 2012 time period. Then there wasn't much done with it until 2019. And the county had an appraisal done of that trestle property and it came up to be like 120,000. And since there's other owners that were ownership of the land around that parcel, my understanding is the county had their 40 grand put up and that to, acquire the property if needed. And the city of Hudson and the village of North Hudson didn't put up their share of that appraisal at the time. And so Railroad Properties of Hudson bought the property at that time. And now they are requesting to rezone the property and that into low density multifamily housing, and that which is an RM1 zoning district in the village of North Hudson. And that's what they call it. So the north part, north of Lake Malibu, that railroad strip, the village of North Hudson Plan Commission actually approved to their full village board back in December to rezone both north and south halves and that to that low density housing. So that's what the Plan Commission did. On January 6th, the full village board approved the zoning change for the north part to RM1. And they did not approve, or they took and tabled the south part. And so that's kind of where we are currently in their new comprehensive plan that the village adopted on January 6th. That south parcel is guided for conservancy, commercial, and residential. So it's got all three primary categories that for guidance. When I talked to Gina with the village, it was suggested that they guide that property that way so that it wouldn't block in the village board for what they wanted to do with the property. So that was from the village council. And so that's currently where we are. So the county, the surrounding properties there, the county owns 50% of the properties, and then the village owns 20, the city owns 20, and the town of Hudson owns 10. And the city of Hudson is responsible for the maintenance of the dam. They do the inspections and align all of that. The only thing that the county is a financial partner in that. And I will say that it is working very well. Everybody's getting along with the city, village, and the county. And so it's very smooth right now. So back to the resolution here, being that we were an adjoining property owner, the county, can provide public comment to the village, and that's essentially what this would be our opinion on how the property should be zoned. With that, does anybody have any questions? Yeah, Supervisor Shirley?
I think I know this answer, but have we heard anything from the city of Hudson?
And that, no.
I didn't think so. Okay. I find it interesting that this property includes the trestle bridge. So potentially what they're asking for, well, not asking for because he already bought the property, is you have a private property owner owning a section basically of Lake Malibu as it exits the lake. It's an interesting conundrum. where I mean, technically, that being that his land, he can control what goes into that area, and that's an interesting problem that we now have. I would say that I would agree that we would oppose the rezoning. I think, like you said earlier, the rezoning already happened on the north property. Probably a better fit up there than it is down below. I am curious. I'm not sure if anybody knows offhand, but does the county actually own any raw land like this within any other village or municipality anywhere in the county?
I'm sure we've got some.
Yeah, we
outlots
have
and
tax deeded
deed.
properties that we've taken over the decades that, yeah, I could find small remnant parcels that probably are similar.
Okay.
Do we actually need a motion at this point to continue discussion?
Technically,
Not at the committee, okay. All right, well then I'll weigh in. I know we're all reluctant to tell any village or city or town what to do. And the sense I get from this committee is nobody wants to halt development when it makes sense. Anyone who's standing like on Highway 35 looking out to the St. Croix, the northern parcel is here, southern parcel is down here. And it's sandy and they're, on nice days, people are fishing and sometimes people swimming. It's very common for decades, people have been fishing down there. De facto, we may call it a park, we may not call it a park, but that's how it's being used. And it's an unusual little piece of land. Lots of birds. There are trees there where on any given day you can see lots of eagles and pelicans come up there. So it feels like a conservancy area. So I'd like to see this move forward. I do have a call in to Rich O'Connor. He and I, the mayor of Hudson, he and I have been texting back and forth. We're going to try to huddle next week. Nobody wants to make a mess out of this. We do want to sit at the table with the village and the developer and say, how can we lower the temperature a little bit? Most of the people in the area that have made public comment have been concerned about the southern parcel. There are some people on the northern parcel, and some of it is kind of predictable comments. But I think if we treat this as land that the county has an interest in and that we'd like to see come up with an answer that works for everyone, I think that's a healthy approach. So yeah, I would second or start any motion and see it move forward to the full board and see us talk about it some more. And by early February, we may have an answer too from the city of Hudson. So.
Before we get too excited, just a question, and I think Ken would be the man who could answer this. How much does that land cost the county? How much do we spend on that land a year?
Well, we don't have any holding costs for the land.
Okay. So it really drains nothing out of the county coffers?
Correct, yeah. It's a zero cost. There's nothing, we don't do any maintenance down there.
Okay.
So I would say zero.
Okay. With that in mind, I think we'd be foolish not to go ahead with the resolution. I think, as Carrie Rice says, that's too special of a place to put single family dwellings on, especially when the water comes up in the spring. It would make no sense to put it on there. So I think we ought to just keep it as it is, leave it as is. If people want to fish there, great, fish there.
I'll add one thing I should have mentioned earlier, and that is one of the reasons that the city of Hudson didn't move forward a few months ago on this is, as the mayor said, he said, there is no water or sewer down here. There's no big roads. So he viewed it as an area that would be impractical to develop. So.
With that said, there's a lot of impractical areas that have been developed, and that's what we want to guard against, I think. So is it time to make a motion that we? Go for it. Okay. I make a motion that we adopt a resolution opposing the rezoning request pending before the Village of North Hudson by the Railroad Properties of Hudson for parcel 161, 1070, 20, and 003.
I'll second.
So we have a motion and second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion carries. So we'll The motion then is to recommend this to the full board. Thank you. So we'll move on then to item number 4, which is the discussion of Chapter 15 ordinance amendments.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a follow-up to our work session that we had last Thursday night. And out of that work session, we had a couple different changes. And also, I had talked or gathered input from the committee on possibly combining Chapter 14 with 15. And so that's really why this is on the agenda tonight. In all transparency, I got my weeks off, and so I was very shocked that tonight came up as fast as it did because I thought I had an extra week in here. So I apologize for not getting this into the packet, but it's been kind of a scramble because I also switched gears a little bit because Chapter 14 was very old, and I don't want to get too much into the details here, but there is a couple sections in regards to non-metallic mining permit. And for whatever reason, this isn't showing up as a red line. Okay, so like section 14.3 here is talking about a non-metallic mining permit. This is essentially the same process as what we would currently do with an administrative permit, like a land use permit, or a CUP through the committee. And then it goes on even in more detail to talk about an operations permit. Operations, so section 14.3 and 14.5. And so there's some general conditions. And so, believe it or not, I do have a red line draft here, and that's showing that these sections would go away. But then what that would look like in Chapter 15. So go down to mining. Okay, I'll come back to home occupations. Okay, so non-metallic mining, this is our use standards or like our performance standards for non-metallic mining. And so that non-metallic mining permit and the operation standards would come into this section of the ordinance so that it's still there. Now, Chapter 14 is basically the county's reclamation ordinance. The county is mandated to have a reclamation ordinance, and I misspoke before too because I had said, well, we can combine it all into this ordinance, and true, we can, but then we won't have any reclamation standards in the towns that don't have county zoning. So that's the issue with this ordinance having everything. So we still need to take and retain a reclamation ordinance, simplify it right down to those standards, which the administrative code chapter for reclamations NR 135. And for the most part, Chapter 14, that's what it is, except for 14.3 and 14.5 that I just showed you. So we'll keep that, keep it separate, make sure that it complies with NR 135, and then put the standards in here, like the 100-foot setback from any lot line that they have to take and comply with the 5-foot separation to bedrock, that the permit is only good for the term of the lease that the operator has, so that we either need a new lease or they need to reclaim the site before they move on and then they don't have any ties to the property. One of the things that St. Croix County is very unique on in any of these ordinances is we've got extensive language in regards to if a proposed mine was going to mine into the groundwater table. And so all of that I just copied and pasted from Chapter 14 into this draft here. and we don't technically have too many of them. We got an old rock quarry down by Knapp there, southeast corner of the county, and that is into the groundwater table, but most of them don't go, but we've got some that are close. So a lot of good standards here to address that. Gives the committee, and that because you guys would be the ones evaluating any CUPs for non-metallic mines, the ability to ask for extra information, and that if there's unique features like karst, sinkholes, or stream banks in the area. Also, there was, I'll call it a use standard for having fuel stored on site in proper containers and containment vessels. So we just copied that, brought it in here. So that way we're not taking and having land use permit standards and CUP standards in two different ordinances, if that makes sense. So, and so still looking at moving forward with chapter 14 for the February hearing, and then the standards in chapter 15, if you're okay with that. So it's more of a procedural thing, not a full combination right now. Any questions on the mining side? One thing I will point out, and again, 14 is not on the agenda, so I'm not trying to talk too much about that, but Chapter 14, the county has had a non-metallic mining ordinance since even before NR 135 existed. So it goes back to 1989. And there has been a long-term belief that we can't amend Chapter 14 because we'll lose some of our provisions. And I don't really see that now with NR 135, and I think that we want to take and try to, be up to date with the administrative code and administering it. So it's still got a lot of the protections, and I think by moving those groundwater standards into our general zoning ordinance, it'll actually be more legally defensible than if it was in Chapter 14, because it's supposed to kind of follow NR 135. Supervisor Shirley.
Just one thing I just saw on your non-metallic right below your cursor there, we took out R1 as a zoning district for that.
Okay. Okay.
One other thing, Jason, 1989 wasn't that long ago, sorry.
It's been a while, so.
We could ask for a vote of the people in the room to see which way that should go.
So anyway, literally, a lot of Chapter 14, you'll see that a lot of it does stay the same because it's in our NR 135. We're meeting with Roberta Wells with the DNR next week to go over the changes because the DNR does have to review that as well. Then some of the other feedback that we had was in regards to, I had proposed a private slaughterhouse option in the ordinance, and that was in the use table, and it was also in the definitions, so both of those were removed. So that was underneath the ag section. Then the committee had questions with the DAT cap change about burial plots and cemeteries. And we did get guidance back from Tim Jackson with DAT cap that we do need those as a conditional use. So otherwise they won't approve it. So private slaughterhouse was right here, so that's gone. And then burial plot and cemetery. So we'll have to leave those where they are. Yeah, so here's burial plot and cemetery, so they'd both be a conditional use only in the Ag 1 and the Ag 2 districts. So those are the only ones that are the farmland preservation districts. And I looked at the actual statute on it. I didn't see any way to squeak it through. It doesn't come out and really call out cemetery or burial plot, but but what they allow for uses as a normal land use permit doesn't fit those two at all. It's all like ag accessory uses, farm residences, you know, it's very much ag related. Okay, then the next change that we had was in regards to home occupations. Okay, and looking through the definition that Supervisor Rice found in SPS 320.01, a lot of the standards that I seen in there were in regards to not changing the character of the home or the lot by having that home occupation on site, that it must be within the home occupation or the actual dwelling. And then about storage, not having items outside, that was mentioned. So, and then there was just kind of a general public nuisance provision, which we kind of have here in our general standards. So we had a lot of that, and I'm going to skip over I here just to pop down. But what I did see in the building code statute was that they did allow for one person other than the resident of the home to be engaged in the business. Now, previously, we had nobody could be assisting. However, the building code also has 25% of the floor area of the dwelling can be used for the home occupation, whereas previously we were at 50%. So put that in there. And again, all this is up to you guys and that depending on what you want. Then some other provisions that they had in the building code, believe it or not, was a minor home occupation cannot involve explosives, fireworks, or repair of motor vehicles. That's right in 320. I can see the repair of motor vehicles. That's probably a common question that we would get. Can I work on some cars in my attached garage? You know, but it wouldn't be allowed in the building code side of it. Then traffic really wasn't addressed above. I mean, it talks about the residential character, but also here that client meetings would be required to be appointment only. So if you're open to the public at all, it'd have to be appointment basis. And then signage shall be limited to a maximum of 2 square feet was one of the options that was out there as we were going through all the various things. 2 square feet isn't very much, but a lot of times people don't want business signage in their residential neighborhood. So I don't know if you like any of those ideas or not, but then also what we had quite a bit of conversation about was the limitation of one home occupation, and that would be a major home occupation per residence would be allowed. So this before, if you remember from last week, said only one minor or major home occupation shall be allowed per residence. So minor or was removed. Any thoughts? Did we kind of get some new things that the committee would like?
The only one that I question is the change from the 50% to 25%. I'm not really set on a number, but do we need to designate any percentage? I mean, the person is living in the house, why do we care? If they want to use 75% of it as their business and live in 25, not for me to say.
Yep.
Did you say that was a code compliance thing with Wisconsin building code?
Yep, but this is a zoning ordinance, not a building code ordinance, so you can take and set that wherever you want. And unless they're going through and building a new structure, they probably won't have to comply with that 25% threshold. So in other words, you can make it whatever you want.
I guess looking at it from the other side, you could have somebody that puts a cot in the back room and has the entire house as a place of business, and The only thing with that is then you're setting yourself up that there's gonna be more business being done there than what you may not necessarily want, where it should actually be a major home occupation then.
Right, and that's kind of the threshold between minor and major. Right here. So if we were gonna change it, we'd also need to change that one for the trigger to jump into a major. So a major would require a CUP hearing, a minor does not, so, yep. Leave it at 50? Okay. Okay, and I think that summarizes the changes that we had on this ordinance. The changes that we had on chapter 17 will be incorporated, 21 will be incorporated, and chapter 14, I'll get that out to the committee just as a direct email. But we'll take and have that for the public hearing in February as well. So it'll be 14, 15, 17, and 21 will be the 4 ordinances. So really in chapter 14, there's not a lot that we have say about that's, you know, policy driven. It's basically administrative code driven. So, all right. Any other thoughts or suggestions? Okay. All right.
Looks good, Jason, thank you.
That's that one, yep.
So if you're ready, then we'll move on to the financial report for December 2025.
Oh, I X'd out.
Yep, don't worry about it.
Ken, maybe you should know that being Europe, the people are leaving.
What? Virginia?
I just thought.
Have a good trip home. All right. Sorry, Jason exited out, so I had to get back in. Okay, Register of Deeds. So this is December numbers, but they're not final numbers. Like the first payroll in January, it covers the end of the year, so we have to book some of that back. So there's a lot of accounting entries. A lot of times revenues too, grants especially. You have to get to the end of the year, and then you file that fourth quarter, and you get that in the next couple months. So those get booked back. So it is the final numbers, but they're not final. All right, so the main thing I look for at the Register of Deeds is the amount of Register of Deeds fees. So we did hit $1,078,000, higher than the last couple of years. So a good trend that we're seeing there it's kind of a trend for economic development. You can tell what's going on in the county by that. Parks Department, we did end up finishing the year with park revenues down lower. So you're seeing that declining trend. But the parks are doing some other things to offset that with some operating expenses. And then you're going to see this large negative down here. But a lot of that was some capital investments that were made in the parks. And so that's what's causing it. It's not necessarily from their operating. I don't know, like this one, it's missing revenues that we're still looking for there. Other than that, did you have any questions? I think those were the highlights of what I wanted to make sure I covered. Yeah.
Go ahead.
You know, just given the magnitude of the data that was presented tonight, I don't want to sound like an open checkbook at all, but it seems like our Resource Land and Water Conservation Department, I think this committee would be open to hearing ideas for how they what resources they need to be more effective. I'm not suggesting more staff, but we did talk about more communication, more information. Supervisor Van Summeren mentioned it, but we had an awful lot of emotion over the last years presented in this committee meeting. People believing that, you know, their way of life was being changed by this proposed solar panel and project. And yeah, I'd be the last one to say it's a beautiful, you know, proposal. But the flip side of it is that most of this area is surrounded by corn that is not on a nutrient management plan. So there's a pretty good chance that water quality in that area might improve in the event that Excel is successful. So it seems like, you know, any information, education that this department wants to consider for the 2027 year going forward, I would be supportive of proposals from them.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, I'll refer them to Adam, our public information officer, and see if they can't brainstorm some ideas. Thank you.
All right, request for future agenda items? Anyone? No? All right. Do we have any announcements?
Mr. Chair, I just got one here that the fee stations or the kiosk at the parks are operational now. So this is at Homestead and Glen Hills. From talking with our park property managers, they've been well received by the neighbors and the people using them. The surrounding property owners are very excited about that they'll actually have hours of operations when people can drive in and out of the parks instead of just being open 24/7. So that's good. And so far, sales have been pretty strong. So since the first of the year through the 14th, and that there's been $1,505 in sales for Glen Hills and Homestead. So I haven't heard any complaints in that with people navigating the kiosk itself. It's pretty simple. I pull up and that you hit what kind of pass you want. It's like hitting two buttons. You take and swipe your card and you go in. Otherwise, and that if you got an annual pass, you just take and swipe it like you do at the gas pump. The gate opens and it lets you in. So
Nice.
that's all I've got.
All right, thank you. Moving on, then we have the date of the next meeting. So looking at third week, I gotta get a calendar out, I guess, here.
It says it's on the agenda here.
Oh, is it?
February 19th.
Thank you. Jeez,
At least on mine it was.
yeah. Oh, February 19th, 2026, 5 PM. So if there's nothing else, we'll adjourn at 6:57. Yeah, thank you.
Turned around the last couple months.